Hello, it looks like we're good, I think. It seems like we're live. Give it a few minutes to see who pops in to say hello. Alrighty. Turn that on. Fix this. There we go. Alright. Should be good. Hopefully everyone's having a good day today. I'm doing alright. Get rid of that. Get rid of this. And that. And that. Where? Dang it, where is it? Where did the freaking... Why do you keep doing this? Ah, there it is. Thank you. Hello, Jeff. Hello, Jessica. I don't know why my freaking program keeps doing this to me, but now we're back. Good. I'm streaming later in the day, if you didn't notice. Because, I was trying to do earlier because I like sleeping. And, was trying to sleep early, but I think afternoons tend to get better numbers, so I'm just going to have to adjust my sleep schedule. So we're going to test this week and see if streaming both of my streams during the afternoonish will do better, have more folks be able to show up, and if so, then I will have a good excuse to sleep in. Hey, everyone joining us. If you've not joined us for this particular stream before, I will give a quick explanation. I don't know why I have this, like, sinus headache right in the middle of my forehead. Ugh, but anyway. This is a Chinese web novel called Heaven Official's Blessing. We're on chapter 10. The main character is Xie Lian. It is set in a fictional ancient China where everybody's got magical powers, we're martial artists, they're gods and demons and ghosts. Very, very interesting. Kind of Lord of the Ringsy, but China. The main character is a god who has become known as a bad luck god. He's just had the worst kind of luck. Nobody worships him. Nobody likes him. They're really mean to him, but he's a good guy, and he's trying to help people. And the story we're reading is he's trying to, you know, help out people. He's solving mysteries. Right now we're dealing with a ghost bridegroom who keeps kidnapping brides on the way to their weddings. And he's trying to figure out why these brides keep getting kidnapped. He has two young gods who are, well, demigods really, who are helping him out a little bit. They are the assistants of some old friends of his that he doesn't get along with anymore because bad luck god. And he is gonna be in a romance with another man who we've met briefly, but not learned the name of yet. This is a boys' love novel. It's a gay novel. The two main characters are gay. And we should get to the official introduction to the romance interest today, which I think will be exciting. So this is Heaven Official's Blessing, Chapter 10. The mountain's locked ancient temple, the forest of hanging corpses. The two of them rushed back to the Mingguang temple. If you'll remember last time, I should probably give a brief of what exactly was happening. They had found the ancient temple with all the brides that had been murdered. Their corpses are there, but they're they're zombies. They found the zombie brides. And a bunch of human hunters had come up like, we want the money! Yeah, we're stupid! We're gonna run into danger! And so now Xie Lian and his little assistants are trying to protect this group of stupid humans who have run into the temple looking for the zombie brides because they want the reward. So he's like, ah, fuck. Does the main character cause bad luck to those around him? That's plot spoilers. That's plot spoilers, haha. Oh, thank you, Kelly, and welcome. Thanks for the support. Alright, so, they are rushing into the temple to try and stop the zombie brides from murdering the stupid humans. The two of them rushed back to the Mingguang temple. However, the main hall was now completely empty. The only thing that remained in the place of the brides from before was a hideous mess of red veils. Upon seeing this, Xie Lian thought in his heart, "Oh, this is bad, this is bad. They're gonna die. They're gonna totally die." He began rapidly picking up the veils on the ground. The moment he finished, he heard a wave of alarmed cries from outside the temple. Nanfang and Xie Lian took a look outside the window, only to see a dozen or so women dressed in scarlet wedding clothes encircling the villagers. Right now, they were slowly approaching them. Each of the women's faces were deathly pale and were decorated with a smile. Their hands were stretched out in front of them, perpendicular to their bodies. They were the corpses of the brides in the temple. And they're doing the thriller dance. None of the villagers could remain calm as they helplessly watched the brides close in on them. Nobody had time to deal with the bandaged teenager anymore and immediately broke into a run. Little Ying promptly went over to support the teenager as Xie Lian helplessly said, "Don't run!" Who knew how many times he'd already said that phrase tonight? Every time something happened, Xie Lian would have to say it at least 30 to 40 times. However, there would always be people who turned a deaf ear to his warnings. He felt truly quite helpless. Xie Lian waved his hand, and the silk... Asterisk. His weapon is a bunch of silk bandages that tend to be wrapped around his body, but when he needs to, he can, animate them, and they fly around and they catch people. I don't call it by its name because I do not know how to pronounce it in Chinese, and no one's told me the pronunciation yet, so I'm just not gonna be messing it up all the time, so I just call it the silk. Began flying out toward the sky. After casually making a hand sign, the silk began whirling around in the air by itself. It looked as if it was a heavenly woman randomly dancing about, a sight that was extremely eye-catching. And when that group of brides saw there was something lively spinning around in a cheerful manner, something whose tail would whip at them from time to time, many of them were lured over by the silk. However, there were 7 more brides that were attracted to the heavy scent of blood within the depths of the forest. They were currently slowly hopping over there. Xie Lian immediately said, "Nanfang, catch up to them! Don't let them go down the mountain!" There was no need to say any more, because Nanfang had already begun chasing after them. On the other hand, 2 brides began attacking Xie Lian. Their 10 fingers were scarlet red and their fingernails extremely sharp as they reached over. In response, Xie Lian took out 2 veils he'd picked up from the ground and suddenly threw them. The veils flew out as they spun in the air before neatly covering the heads of the 2 brides. Immediately, their actions became sluggish. Sure enough, the moment they were covered with the veil, their noses and eyes blocked by a thick layer of cloth, the brides no longer became able to see shadows of people or smell the scent of the living. And because their bodies were stiff corpses, it was impossible for them to bend their arms and take off the veils by themselves. They could only stretch out their hands and randomly claw in frantic directions, as if they were playing a game of hide and seek. Jessica says, I think it's Ruoya. Ruoya. Ruoe. Ruoe. That might be, okay, that might be how to say the veil's name, or the silk's name. Ruoi. Ruoi or Roy? I keep wanting to call it Roy. Anyway, I will try and pronounce it that way. The scene was truly frightening, yet comical at the same time. Xie Lian stood in front of the 2 brides and waved his hands in front of their faces in a probing manner. When he saw they were completely unaware of his presence, and instead began stretching their hands in opposite directions, Xie Lian began to think. After a moment, he couldn't hold back and said, "Excuse me for this." Xie Lian grabbed a hand from each bride before placing them on the other's neck. The 2 brides suddenly touched something and were surprised. Since they couldn't see anything, they began to fiercely destroy each other. Xie Lian quickly ran away before he raised another hand. The silk Ruoye followed... Ruoye? God, I just want to call it Roy. God, brain, get better at this. The silk Ruoye followed him in a flash of faint rainbow light before it silently fell onto the ground, creating a huge white loop. Xie Lian yelled at the villagers who were still running about in all directions. "Everyone, go into the ring!" The group of people hesitated as they ran everywhere, but little Ying quickly supported the bandaged teenager and stood inside the circle. After thinking for a moment, little Ying ran out again and dragged inside the little youngster who'd fainted and was lying on the ground. Better than he deserved. At this moment, another bride had jumped over to the edge of the white loop. She stretched out her hands to claw at them, but it was like she was separated from the inside of the loop by an invisible wall. Little Ying realized the brides couldn't hop into the loop no matter what they did and hastily cried, "Everyone, quickly, come in! They can't enter the white loop!" Upon seeing this, all the villagers promptly rushed over like a swarm of bees. It was fortunate Xie Lian made the silk roi become a few times longer than its original length, so the loop would be sufficiently large. Otherwise, he would have had to worry over whether or not people would be squeezed out. The brides couldn't jump into the loop and knew they wouldn't be able to touch anything inside. Simultaneously turning around, they smiled sharply at Xie Lian and began rushing over to him. However, Xie Lian had been long waiting for them, taking out a whole lot of veils from inside his sleeves. 4 or 5 pieces of red cloth began spinning around in his palms. His feet moved unceasingly and his hands didn't rest. The moment a bride charged at him, he would accurately cover her with a veil. After a bride's head was covered, she would begin groping around in a blind and sluggish manner. Those veils that spun around in the sky dazzled people's eyes. Xie Lian tossed and flung the red cloths in a skillful and easy manner, with those veils flying out in the air like red shadows. The people in the white loop actually couldn't stop themselves from cheering and applauding at the scene. "Great! Amazing! Truly too amazing! This skill's been practiced before, right?" When Xie Lian heard this, he habitually blurted out, "Not bad, not bad. Those who have money, please tip me. Those who don't, please watch and support me with your enthusiasm." Only after he said those words did he realize something was wrong. The words he used to say to his audience after a performance actually slipped out of his mouth. Thus, Xie Lian's words quickly came to a halt. Because when he was poor, he used to perform... I think they talked about this last chapter. He used to be a street performer. So when everyone started clapping, he was like, "Yeah, give me tips, like, share, and subscribe." I love that little detail. Hey, Akatsuki. While he'd been speaking, a few more brides began hopping up. Every jump of theirs was at least 7 chi tall, and carried them 3 zang far. Those are distances. In a flash, they arrived in front of Xie Lian with a puff of rotten stink. Xie Lian bounced off his feet and propelled himself into the sky. In the air, he quickly mouthed the password to the spirit communication array 3 times before saying, "Len Wing!" No, I said that wrong. Why did I read that? Dyslexia! It's Ling Wen, not... What did I say? What did I say? Len Wing, I think? I moved the G. Ling Wen, the all-knowing. I have a question. Do you know if the martial god of the north, General Ming Guang, has a close female friend? Ling Wen's voice echoed in his ear. "Your Highness, what are you asking this for?" Xie Lian replied, "Right now, my situation is a bit critical. To tell the truth, there's around 10 or so dead people chasing after me." Ling Wen replied, "Oh, that's terrible?" Xie Lian, "It's not that bad. In any case, does he have any? I know this question is fairly personal and hard to answer, so I didn't ask within the spirit array. However, it's required for my mission, and I definitely wouldn't divulge the information." Ling Wen replied, "Your Highness, you've misunderstood. It isn't that the question's hard to answer. No, it's because Old Pei has too many female confidants. When you asked me that question so suddenly, for a while I didn't know which one you were asking about." So what he's asking is, they've discovered the secret temple hidden in the mountain, that is the temple to the god of this region, which for some reason has only been built on this secret mountain and nowhere in the village nearby. And so he's like, there's something up with this mysterious temple to this god, Ming Guang. And so he's kind of put together the fact that it has something to do with getting married and this male god. And he's like, "Hey, does this male god have any lovers, any paramours?" And she's like, "He has too many. He has so many ladies." When he heard that, Xie Lian nearly twisted his ankle. All right, then within General Pei's close female friends, is there someone that is highly possessive, extremely prone to jealousy, and has a disability somewhere on her body? Ling Wen said, "When you say it like that, I actually thought of someone." Xie Lian once again set out 2 red veils, attracting another wave of cheers. Turning around, he cupped his hands in a salute before he said, "Please explain." Ling Wen replied, "Before Old Pei ascended, he had been a general. On the battlefield, he met a female general from an enemy country. She was extremely beautiful and alluring, and her temperament was heroic and fierce. Her name was Xuanji." Probably saying that wrong, too. I've tried Googling these names. Google does not want to give me the way to pronounce these Chinese words. It does not. It does not want me to know. I wish there was like a guide on the fan wiki or something. Ling Wen continued speaking. General Pei, this person, whenever he meets a beautiful woman, even if she is holding a knife to his throat, he would still seek her company. This woman led troops and crossed swords with him, but in the end she was defeated. Xuanji became a captive and was sent to an enemy camp. Taking advantage of how her escorts were unprepared, she planned to commit suicide on the spot. However, her attempt hadn't been successful. A general had chopped her long sword in half with a single strike of his own sword, saving her. And the elegant and graceful enemy, General Pei, later ascended, which means became a god, and became General Ming Guang. So General Pei is the human name, I'm assuming. Ming Guang is his god name, but it's the same dude. General Pei, on the one hand, was someone who was always tender and had protective feelings for the fairer sex. Secondly, the outcome of the war had already been determined. Even if the two countries continued to squabble back and forth, it was impossible for the enemy country to make a comeback. Thus, he released Xuanji. Well, over a period of time, a certain situation gradually emerged, and what happened afterwards was extremely easy to imagine. At a time, a bride grabbed Xie Lian's right leg. Her 5 fingers tightened until they nearly dug into his skin. He was just about to kick her when he suddenly realized at this angle he would have no choice but to kick her face. In his heart, Xie Lian thought that it wasn't good to hit a girl's face. Thus, he changed his position and kicked her shoulder before throwing out another veil. Then he replied, "That sounds like a beautiful and admirable story." Ling Wen said it originally was a beautiful story. However, what went wrong was that Xuanji became adamant in becoming General Pei's only lover for the rest of their lives. Somehow I don't think he wanted that. In 2 steps, Xie Lian leapt and climbed onto the roof. As he looked down upon the 5 or 6 brides that continued approaching, he wiped away some sweat and said, "In the first place, it isn't wrong for a woman to wish her lover would only love her for the rest of their lives." Ling Wen responded, "It indeed isn't wrong. However, the two countries were in a state of war. On the battlefield, everyone was ruthless. Originally, Xuanji and General Pei came to an agreement of having a short-lived relationship. They were completely willing to only have the present with no following morning, where they would talk romance and not chat about war. Moreover, for old Pei, if I speak frankly, if he doesn't lead you on with another woman, it's already not too bad." In other words, he just has way too many ladies. However, Xuanji was a noble woman from a general family. Her personality was extremely fierce. For the things she wanted, she wouldn't let go, even if she had to kill them. Wait a moment. Xie Lian quickly cut Ling Wen off. "Tell me first, is Xuanji disabled or not? What is her disability?" "It's her." When Ling Wen said those words, her voice suddenly came to an abrupt halt. It was too annoying. Every time Xie Lian was about to hear the crucial points, the spiritual energy he had borrowed was completely used up. Next time, it seemed he had to ask his informant to say the main points first. In the middle of a leap, Xie Lian quickly tidied up his thoughts once again. If the bandaged teenager was not the ghost bridegroom, and if every villager had already confirmed with each other the ghost bridegroom hadn't mixed into their group, then the only remaining place it could hide was within the brides. When he had hid in the group of brides himself, the ghost bridegroom hadn't managed to notice something wrong. In return, when the ghost bridegroom mixed into the corpses, he didn't manage to tell at first there was an extra body. If he carefully thought things over, after the silk ruoi injured the ghost bridegroom, he only saw a cloud of black mist roll into the woods. There was no guarantee someone had been hiding within the cloud. In fact, Xie Lian was afraid when he rushed out toward the forest, the ghost bridegroom stayed within the mist, brushed past him before returning to the temple. By hiding within the forest leaves, it sneaked itself back into the group of corpses. In that case, the ghost bridegroom wasn't a bridegroom and was instead a bride. In fact, she was a woman wearing a bride's wedding dress. Since she was a woman, a lot of mysteries could be explained. For example, why the Mount Yujun region didn't have any other Mingguang temples. It wasn't because people didn't want to build one. It was because they couldn't build one. Little Ying had said whenever the decision to build a Mingguang temple was made, the temple would always catch on fire for no reason before it was completed. That didn't sound very coincidental, so the only explanation for it was that someone had deliberately set those temples on fire. And why would someone set fire to the unfinished temples? Under normal circumstances, it would be because of hate. However, within Mount Yujun, there was a Mingguang temple blocked from the outside world by a befuddling array. No one could enter it, yet the workmanship of the godly statue inside was very superb. In addition, the preservation of the statue was good as well. Why was that so? The ghost bridegroom wore a wedding dress herself, but she couldn't bear to see smiling brides within the Mount Yujun region. Why was that the case? After connecting all these clues, other than the desire to monopolize someone and extreme jealousy, Xie Lian couldn't think of any other answers. And for that weird noise that sounded like something heavy was being dragged across the floor with a wooden stick wrapped in thick cloth, if they were truly the sound of footsteps, Xie Lian could only think of one possibility. He had already covered all the brides chasing after him with a veil. Thus, Xie Lian was finally able to fall back on the ground as he lightly released a breath. Then, concentrating his attention, Xie Lian got up and counted the brides. 1, 2, 3, 4. I knew it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. Give me a sec, I gotta message this. Oh, wait. Seven brides had hopped into the forest, with Nan Fang chasing after them. 10 brides had their heads covered by veils again because of him, and they were all here. In that case, there was still one more bride who still hadn't appeared. So to explain his thought process, the temple to this god that the human woman, loved at one point, only exists on the mountain. Anyone that tries to build them elsewhere, they get burned down because the ghost lady's jealous. She wants to monopolize the god for herself. And whenever there is a wedding in the area, she's so jealous because she never got to marry her man that she kills the brides. That's why she's stayed in this temple in the mountains. That's why all the brides in the area have died. And her disability, which I think they're about to explain, is the reason for why her footsteps sound so strange. Right at that moment, from behind him, Xie Lian heard the familiar and strange thumping noises again. Slowly turning around, Xie Lian saw a very short and small figure appear within his sight. He lightly sucked in a breath and thought in his heart, sure enough, it's like this. The short and small woman in front of him was dressed all in red. There wasn't a happy atmosphere surrounding her, and instead she looked mournful. However, the reason she was so short and small wasn't because she had a petite figure. No, it was because she was kneeling on the ground. Both her legs were broken, but her lower legs hadn't been broken off. Instead, she'd been walking this entire time using her knees. In fact, the weird thumping noises Xie Lian had heard were precisely caused by this bride's broken legs as she hopped and moved around. Dun dun dun! Alright, so that was chapter 10. We're going to continue with chapter 11. I'm gonna refill my water and then we'll continue real quick. Alrighty. I had to run and get my headache pills from the other room because frickin' I think it's the weather changing all the time has me with a pressure headache. Grr. Hey, Delvin. Welcome. Alright, so this is chapter 11. The female ghost had an oval face with a pair of arched eyebrows. She really was extremely beautiful. Although her beauty may have alluded to hints of heroism before, now it only bled unconcealed resentment, as if all her hatred had been concentrated into a confined space where no light could be shed. As she knelt on the ground, the part of her bridal dress below the knee looked threadbare and ragged. It was now obvious how the rumors had started. The two of them stared in silence for a moment before Xie Lian finally spoke. Xuanji? It seemed it had been many years since someone called her by her name. Aw, thank you, Delvin. Thanks for the support. I hope you have a good day at work. It took a while for the resentment reflected in the female ghost's face to faintly scatter, replaced by a light that flashed across her eyes. She spoke. He sent you to come find me, didn't he? This he, Xie Lian guessed, certainly must be referring to General Pei. Xuanji then proceeded to ask, what about him? Why didn't he come see me himself? When she spoke, her face held such a fervent, hopeful, and anticipatory expression that it made this person spelled his name wrong at this part, Xie Lian feel it the best not to reply with a no, he didn't send me. Seeing Xie Lian's silence, Xuanji suddenly collapsed and sat on the floor. She leaned against the statue of the handsome and tall martial god as her crimson bridal attire spread across the earth, not unlike that of a massive, blood-stained flower. An unstained flower, convenient. With her hair in disarray, face contorted with pain, it was as though she was subjected to great torment. Xuanji asked, why does he not come see me? This was yet another question Xie Lian could not answer. Thus he could only remain solemn. Xuanji raised her head and gazed at the god statue before she mournfully cried, Pei Long, oh Pei Long, I betrayed my kingdom for you. I abandoned my everything and turned into this. Why won't you come see me? With both hands, Xuanji yanked at her own hair and continued to question, Pei Long, is your heart made of iron? Xie Lian silently observed her. Upon hearing these lines, he inwardly pondered. Xuanji said she betrayed her kingdom for General Pei. Could it be that this General Pei took advantage of their intimacy to deceive secret military intelligence from her, which led to Xuanji's kingdom's defeat in war? She also said that it was only because of General Pei she became this way. By became this way, it could only be referring to her awful, broken-legged, miserable state. Xuanji was a female general to be on the battlefield. It would not have been possible for her to be handicapped, which could only mean her legs were broken after the fact. Could this have something to do with General Pei as well? Could it be that when General Pei no longer found her useful and tossed her aside, this was the very reason that led to her resentment being so deep? Yeah, Katsuki's got a good thought there. General Pei's not a good dude. He is into too many women, but in this particular instance, you'll find he really probably wasn't that much in the wrong, other than just being like, hey. He's kind of like Sylvain. He's really upfront about the fact that he's just a playboy, but she really wanted to hold on to him too hard. Although Xie Lian felt having these thoughts was quite tasteless, with Xuanji's resentment so deep to the point she would harm innocent lives, his thoughts may be vulgar, but he could only force himself to continue thinking this way for the time being. Suddenly, a woman's scream came from outside the temple. Help! Help! Xie Lian and Xuanji glanced out the window at the same time. What they saw was that within the white circle Ruoi had fallen into, a person was dragging the bandaged teenager outwards. Little Ying was firmly clinging onto that person's leg without letting go, causing that person to start raining curses. It was, in fact, that youngster from before. Scram, you moronic trash! What if your shouts attract that ghost over? Little Ying continued loudly, If I shout her over, then so be it. You're much worse than the ghost. I'd rather face that female ghost than you. As it turned out, the youngster that Xie Lian had knocked unconscious with his silk had woken up. Seeing how his surroundings were littered with fumbling deceased brides had frightened him at first. However, he quickly took notice they were all unable to see. Emboldened and being all brawn and no brains, he'd thought while the others were too scared to move, he would drag the bandaged teenager down the mountain and claim the bounty for himself. He cared not whether the bandaged boy was actually the ghost bridegroom. Since everyone below the mountain thought he was, then he is. Who knew little Ying would throw herself over at him, shouting and screaming, startling all the brides roaming around, as well as Xuanji from within Mingguang Temple. When Xie Lian saw it and realized the youngster was at it again, he regretted not being more ruthless. He should have been more ruthless and knocked him out so he wouldn't wake up for another 3 days and 3 nights. Xie Lian shouted, "Hurry up and return to the circle!" When the youngster suddenly saw a black fog headed toward him, he frantically withdrew. But he was dragging a bandaged teenager and his leg was being clung onto by little Ying. Thus, being a step too slow, he was instantly swallowed up by the black fog and brought back into Xuanji's hands. As he turned around to look, he thought, this messy, long-haired, gloomy woman, wasn't she one of the corpse brides lying among the group from before? The beautiful corpse he had touched and groped? Oh, so she's getting revenge for him groping her. I approve. As things stand, the youngster finally knew to be afraid and started screaming. Xuanji bent her 5 fingers, piercing through and instantly ripping out his skull from within his thick scalp. The stripped skull was piping hot, its mouth still agape in a scream. Ah! Within the protective white circle, the terrified bystanders who'd nearly had their souls frightened out of their skins also began screaming, "Ah!" Little Ying was also terror-stricken, screaming as she dragged the bandaged teenager into the circle. Xuanji reached out toward them with 5 fingers extended again, but this time, Xie Lian darted in front of her to block before saying, "General, cease this killing." He called her General, originally intending to remind her she was once a heroine who charged on the front lines in the battlefield to protect and defend in the name of her kingdom. Be that as it may, Xuanji instantly crushed the still screaming skull in her hands to pieces, with her beautiful face in that moment seeming quite deformed. She sneered, "Is he afraid to come see me?" Xie Lian was at a loss. He thought to himself, might as well pretend to be sent by General Pei first. Yet Xuanji didn't need a reply. She laughed aloud a few times before she suddenly turned around and pointed at the godly statues. "I burn your temples and stir up trouble in your domain, all in hopes you'd come pay me a glance. I've waited for you for so many years." She stared at the godly statue in a daze for a long while, before she suddenly leapt up, strangling its neck and shaking violently as she screeched, "Yet you still refuse to come see me! Is it because you feel guilt towards me? Look at my legs! Look at my appearance now! It was all for you! All for you! Is your heart made of iron?" As an outsider, Xie Lian did not think he had the right to comment. However, according to his own feelings, he couldn't help but think to himself, if you wanted to see him, couldn't you have done it in a more normal way? If there was someone who wanted to see me using your methods, I wouldn't want to come at all. I love this boy. He's so great. On the other end, little Ying and the bandaged teenager finally returned to the circle and looked in his direction. Little Ying anxiously whispered, "Young lord." Upon hearing her, Xie Lian smiled, indicating she need not worry. But who would have known that this smile of his would cause Xuanji's face to instantly contort? Suddenly leaping down from the godly statue, she bolted over and said, "Since you don't look at me, but instead like looking at other women who like to smile, I will slowly let you have your fill." Although the one she'd begun strangling was Xie Lian, her words were nevertheless directed at General Pei. Xie Lian originally thought it was because Xuanji was not able to marry the one she loved, and thus, upon seeing the brides on the marriage sedan smiling happily, her heart became filled with jealousy. He'd never thought it would turn out to be because this General Pei liked women who liked to smile. In Xuanji's deranged state, she managed to distort the smiling brides to them getting married to her beloved instead. No wonder she'd burned down all the Mingguang temples below the mountain. It was because she could no longer bear to see all these women coming and going in and out of General Pei's temple all day, all the while sharing the same godly statue as her. This female ghost was worthy of being ranked Wrath. Despite her broken legs, her speed was still so demonically fast. Even after she'd been hit by Ruoy, she still remained incredibly strong. Xie Lian and her became stuck in a deadlock as she strangled him. He was just about to call Ruoy over when he heard a sudden shout. Bye, Diana. Thanks for joining us. Have a good one. When that young girl, Little Ying, saw his current predicament with the female ghost, she swiftly picked up a branch from the ground and charged over. As she was running, she began yelling loudly, as if this would give herself more courage in the process. Xuanji had no need to even make a move against Little Ying. She only turned to look at her, and the next moment, Little Ying was flung backwards before she could even come close. She flew several meters away with her head downward and body upward before she smashed into the ground. The bandaged teenager hoarsely cried, "Ah!" as he rushed over. Xie Lian was also startled before sitting up. However, he suddenly felt a chill from behind his head. Xuanji's 5 fingers were already upon his head, as if she was about to rip his skull out of his scalp, like she'd done with the youngster from before. In a moment of desperation, Xie Lian's right hand grabbed her wrist before shouting, "Bind!" Only the sound, shwa shwa, burst into the air as a white strip of silk immediately appeared. Ruoy wound itself around Xuanji, binding her upper body with her arms tied behind her back. Since Xuanji's legs were already broken, she was unable to dodge in time. She fell heavily on her knees with a thump, then proceeded to roll about on the ground in an attempt to break apart the white silk. Her actions, however, only made Ruoy wound around her tighter. Having barely escaped from the crisis, Xie Lian hadn't even caught his breath before he immediately got up and ran toward where Little Ying had fallen. With Ruoy having been called away by Xie Lian, there were still people too wary to randomly move about, but there were also a few villagers bold enough to have become used to the fumbling brides and went to encircle Xie Lian and Little Ying. The bandaged teenager knelt by Little Ying's side at a loss of what to do. He was as anxious as if he was a small bug on a hot pot. No one dared to move her, because they were all worried she may have broken something important. If they moved her now, it could make her situation worse. Xie Lian quickly checked her condition, despite knowing in his heart, no matter how careful they were around her, it would be useless. With a fall like that, it was obvious she wouldn't live through it. Even though his time spent with this girl was not long, not to mention they hadn't conversed much, he knew despite her appearance being ugly, her heart was kind. For her to have such an ending, it weighed heavily on one's heart. Over on the other side, Xuanji shouldn't be able to break away from Ruoy for a little while longer. Within his heart, Xie Lian thought, even if it's useless, we can't let her die like in this position. So he very carefully flipped her over. Little Ying's face was drenched in blood, causing everyone to sigh and click their tongues at the sight. Yet she still had a breath in her left, so she quietly murmured, "Young lord, I turned out to be more of a hindrance than a help, didn't I?" Although she hadn't hindered him, she really wasn't of any real help either. At that moment, Xie Lian was already about to call for Ruoy, so he wouldn't have needed any help. And as for the branch of hers, even if she somehow managed to land a hit on Xuanji, it wouldn't have resulted in anything at all. What's more, it would have been impossible for her to have approached the ghost in the first place. Truth be told, she had thrown away her life in vain. Xie Lian said, "You didn't. You helped a lot. Look, only after you came over and drew away the female ghost's attention did I have time to subdue her. It was all thanks to you. Next time you can't be like this. If you want to help, you have to tell me first. Otherwise, if I didn't react in time, it could be dangerous." Little Ying smiled and said with a sigh, "Young lord, you don't need to humor me. I know that I did not help at all, nor will there be a next time." Her words became muffled as she coughed up more blood. Within the drops of red were a couple teeth that had broken off. The bandaged teenager was anxious to the point of trembling and could only cry, unable to think of anything to say. Little Ying said to him, "In the future, don't go down the mountain to steal food again. If they find you and beat you to death, you'll be done for." Xie Lian spoke. "If he gets hungry, he can come to me for food." Upon hearing his words, Little Ying's eyes immediately lit up. Really? Then thank you very much." As she smiled, tears slowly trickled down from her eyes. Softly she said, I feel as though my entire life, there weren't many days where I lived happy. Xie Lian also didn't know what to say and gently patted her hand. Little Ying sighed. Oh well, forget it. I might just be someone born unlucky. Her words sounded laughable. Due to her crooked nose and slanted eyes, she was so ugly it was truly a bit comical. With blood and tears running down her cheeks, it almost looked funny. As her tears streamed down, little Ying continued to speak. But still, even so, I still... Having said that, the young girl took her last breath and passed away. The bandaged teenager saw she had died, and so he hugged her dead body and began to quietly sob. His head burrowed into her stomach, as if because he had lost his only support, he refused to lift his head ever again. Xie Lian reached over and closed her eyes before silently telling her from his heart, "You are much stronger than I." Right at this moment, the bizarre sound of a clock could be heard. Dong, dong, dong. 3 chimes echoed loudly. Xie Lian was instantly overcome with a bout of dizziness. He asked, "What's going on?" When he surveyed his surroundings again, the brides all swayed before falling to the ground. Only their arms were still raised, pointing at the sky. The villagers also fell and did not rise again. It was as if they had all lost consciousness from the quake of the ear-splitting clock chimes. Xie Lian also felt a bit dizzy. With one hand on his forehead, he exerted himself to stand up, only for his legs to go weak before he half knelt on the ground. Luckily, someone supported him. When he raised his head up to see who, he discovered it was Nan Fang. As it turned out, after the 7 brides entered the forest, they had dispersed in separate directions. Nan Fang basically had to scour the entire mountain to catch them all, and had just returned. Seeing his calm demeanor, Xie Lian immediately asked, "What's with the bell?" Nan Fang said to him, "Need not worry, they are reinforcements." Following his line of sight, Xie Lian suddenly discovered a row of soldiers had appeared in front of Mingguang Temple. They all wore armor, glowing in divine power as mighty aura faintly radiated from them. At the very front stood a tall and handsome young general. It was clear he wasn't an ordinary person. The general walked over with his hands clasped behind his back. Once he was in front of Xie Lian, he bowed slightly and said, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince." Before Xie Lian was even able to open his mouth to inquire, Nan Fang said in a low voice, "This is General Pei." Xie Lian immediately glanced at Xuanji, who was on the ground, and repeated, "General Pei?" This General Pei wasn't quite what he imagined, nor was he similar to the godly statue at all. The statue was flourishing with heroism, while his countenance overflowed with arrogance. It was an invasive and powerful type of handsomeness. Meanwhile, although this young general was also quite handsome, his appearance was fair, and his countenance looked peaceful like cold jade, void of any killing intent and full of undisturbed calmness. You could say he was a general, yet it wouldn't be strange if somehow he claimed he was a strategizing minister instead. General Pei saw Xuanji on the ground and spoke. "Ling Wang Palace Hall notified us of the situation on Mount Yujun. Notified us that the situation on Mount Yujun has rather a lot to do with us at Mingguang Palace, so this subordinate hurried over. I did not expect that it really does have a rather deep connection with us. For your trouble, you have my gratitude, Your Highness the Crown Prince." Xie Lian thanked Ling Wen in his heart. In what way had Ling Wen's palace efficiency decreased? "I thank you for your troubles as well, General Pei." But when Xuanji in her struggles vaguely heard the words General Pei, she suddenly raised her head and fervently shouted, Pei Long, is it you? Have you come? Have you finally come?" Having been tied up by Ruoi, no matter how wild she was with joy, she could only kneel. Yet who would have expected her to take in the sight of the general only to go pale in the face? "Who are you?" On Xie Lian's side, he was giving Nan Fang a summary of what the situation was with the bridegroom. When he heard her question, he asked, "Isn't this General Pei? Has she waited so long she can't recognize him?" Nan Fang answered, "He is General Pei, but not the one she's been waiting for." Xie Lian found it strange. "Don't tell me there are 2 General Peis!" But Nan Fang answered, "That's right, there are indeed 2. As it turned out, the General Pei this female ghost was waiting for was Mingguang Temple's main god, while the one in front of them was the deputy. He was someone from General Pei's family's successor. To differentiate them when they were called, everyone called this Little General Pei. In a proper Mingguang Temple, it was necessary to honor them both. So in other words, General Pei, the original, is the one that she loved. His descendant also ascended as a god later and is Little Pei. So it's like his grandson. You know, this is his grandson instead of him. He didn't even show up. He sent his kid. General Pei was the main god of the temple, so his god statues faced the temple doors. Little General Pei's god statues were positioned behind his. However, although one was from a previous generation and the other from a later generation, they looked as if they were brothers. For two people from the same family ascending, it could be regarded as a very odd story that captured one's imagination. Xuanji looked around but still did not find the person she wanted to see among the soldiers. She bleakly asked, "Where is Pei Ming? Why did he not come? Why did he not come see me?" Little General Pei nodded his head slightly, answering, "General Pei is occupied with an important matter." Xuanji mumbled, "Important matter?" Under her long hair, her tears started to fall as she said, "I've waited for him for centuries. What important matter does he have? Back then, in order to see me, he would cross half the border in a single night. So what important matter could he have now? So important, he wouldn't be willing to see me once. An important matter? He doesn't actually have one, right?" Little General Pei said, "General Xuanji, please be on your way." Two soldiers of Mingguang Temple broke formation and walked over. Ruoi swiftly leapt from Xuanji and wound around Xie Lian's wrist affectionately. Xie Lian softly patted it twice to comfort it. Xuanji allowed those two soldiers to grab her as she knelt there in a daze. Then abruptly she started to struggle, pointing towards the sky as she cursed, "Pei Ming! I curse you!" Her cry was very sharp. Xie Lian stared blankly before he thought to himself, "Isn't this cursing the predecessor while in front of the successor?" But the little General Pei kept a straight face and said, "Please excuse this scene." Xuanji continued to shout herself hoarse. "I curse you! You'd better never fall in love with anyone! Otherwise, if such a day comes, I curse you to be like me, forevermore and all eternity, to be endlessly scorched by love. Let the fire sear through your entire body and very being." At this time, little General Pei said to Xie Lian and the others, "Please excuse my rudeness and wait a moment." He lifted two fingers and lightly pressed them to his temple. The gesture was what activated the spirit communication array, so he must be talking to someone. After a moment, he let out a lowered his hand, and returned them clasped behind his back. He turned towards Xuanji and said, "General Pei would like me to pass on a message. That is impossible." You could be a little nice, you know? He couldn't even say sorry. I mean, it's not cool what she did. But he could have shown up and said, "Hey, babe, look, I'm sorry, we're not together, but I don't like you no more." Instead, he just says, "That is impossible." That is, jeez, cold-hearted. Little Pei General slightly raised his hand and ordered, "Take her away." The two soldiers picked up the crazily struggling Xuanji and dragged her away. Xie Lian asked, Little General Pei, may I ask, how will Xuanji be dealt with?" Little General Pei answered, "She will be restrained beneath a mountain." Finding a mountain to restrain her, this was indeed the method often used by the heavens to deal with demons and ghosts. After muttering to himself for a while, Xie Lian still said, "This General Xuanji's resentment is rather heavy. Since she's constantly thinking about the hatred from committing treason against her kingdom and her legs were broken because of General Pei, I'm afraid suppressing her won't last long." Little General Pei tilted his head and said, "She said she committed treason and broke her legs due to General Pei?" Xie Lian answered, "She indeed said before that it was because of General Pei she ended up in her current state. As for what the truth is, I do not know." Little General Pei spoke. "If it is to be said that way, then sure, it is true she committed treason for General Pei, but the details differ to what other people may think. After herself and General Pei parted ways, in order to urge him to stay, General Xuanji did not hesitate to offer up military intelligence. However, General Pei was unwilling to accept this unfair advantage and did not take her offer. Xie Lian would never have thought that her "I betrayed my country for you" was actually like this. He asked, then when she said her legs were broken because of General Pei? Little General Pei answered, she broke them herself. Little General Pei answered, flat and unwavering, General Pei does not like strong-minded women, and Xuanji's natural disposition is strong-willed. This is why they could not stay together for long. General Xuanji was unwilling to let go, so she said to General Pei she was willing to make sacrifices and change herself. Thus, she voluntarily abolished her martial arts and broke her own 2 legs. In this way, she did the equivalent of breaking her wings and tying herself to General Pei. Despite all this, General Pei didn't abandon her. He took her in and looked after her. Yet he still wouldn't take her as his wife. Because General Xuanji's long-cherished wish could not be fulfilled, she killed herself in hate. Not for any other reason, but only to make General Pei sad and aggrieved. But forgive me for speaking so bluntly. Little General Pei's speech had been rather refined and courteous from beginning to end. With an overly calm expression, he said, that will not happen. Xie Lian rubbed his forehead. He didn't speak out loud, but he thought to himself, just what kind of people are they? He's not wrong. They're both assholes. Oh, General Pei. Oh, man. Doesn't like strong-willed people. Oh, if he doesn't like strong-willed warrior women, I'll break my legs! Solution! God, yeah, these people are all idiots. Poor Xie Lian. Little General Pei spoke again. As for who was in the right or the wrong, I do not know. I only know that if General Xuanji had originally been willing to let go, it wouldn't have ended this way. Your Highness Crown Prince, this subordinate shall take my leave. Xie Lian returned the fist and palm salute and saw them off. Nan Fang gave his personal evaluation. Weirdos. Xie Lian thought to himself. He himself was also a laughingstock in the 3 realms and a famous weirdo. It was not his place to criticize other people. As for the matter between General Pei and Xuanji, unless one was directly involved, it was better not to comment on who was right or wrong. He could only pity those 17 innocent brides, the military officials and drivers who had escorted them. It truly was an unexpected disaster. Speaking of the brides, he immediately turned to take a look, only to see the dead bodies of the 17 brides were all showing different states of change. Some turned into white bones, others started to rot and emit a foul stench. The odor woke everyone on the ground. When the villagers slowly came to their senses and took in the situation, it was another round of great alarm and shock. Xie Lian took this chance to ramble at them and scatter some doctrine about good and bad karma. He told everyone once they went down the mountain, they must pray a lot for the brides. In addition, they should try to think of ways to notify the brides' families so their corpses could be claimed. They definitely should not do anything shady like selling the corpses or any other shameful deeds. After experiencing such a core-shaking night, and without a leader stirring up trouble, how could anyone dare listen otherwise? One after another, they all agreed while trembling with fear. They all felt as if they'd undergone a nightmare. Only then did they realize how they all acted as if they were possessed last night. With so many dead, how could they still only have thoughts of earning money? Thinking back, they all felt terrified of themselves. Last night, since everyone else did it, they relied on the fact they were big in numbers and there had been someone taking the lead. Thus, their muddle-headed selves rushed along with the flow. Now, still with lingering fear in their hearts, it was best to obediently repent and pray for blessings. Dawn had yet to rise. Within the mountain, there were still wolf packs waiting to cause trouble. Nan Fang had only just done a lap around the mountain, but was already tasked to lead a large group of people off the mountain. In spite of that, he made no complaints and agreed with Xie Lian to discuss the forest of hanging corpses and its follow-up arrangements later. After that, the bandaged teenager woke up. He sat once more by little Ying's corpse, hugging her. Without saying anything, Xie Lian also went to sit next to him. After racking his brain for a while, and just as he was going to say something comforting, he noticed the bandaged teenager's head was bleeding. Bye, Phil. Thanks for joining us. The teenager slowly raised his head. Oh no, I skipped a paragraph. If it was the blood from the corpse forest, it should have dried already, but this blood was still flowing without pause, so it could only be he was injured. Immediately, Xie Lian said to him, "Your head's injured. Take off your bandages and let me help you." The teenager slowly raised his head. his two bloodshot eyes looking at him as he hesitated timidly. Xie Lian gave a small smile and told him, "Don't be afraid. If you are injured, it must be treated. I promise I won't be frightened by you." The teenager hesitated for a moment, then turned around and slowly unwrapped the bandages on his head. His movements were very slow, and Xie Lian waited patiently for him. He was already thinking over what he should ask next. This teenager definitely cannot stay at Mount Yujun, but where could he go? It's not like he could return to heaven with me. Not even I know when my next meal will appear, so I need to think of a dependable arrangement to settle with him. Furthermore, I need to deal with the green ghost Qirong. At this point, the teenager had finished taking off his bandages and turned around. And when Xie Lian clearly took in that face, he felt as if in that split second, all the blood in his body drained away. I wonder what's so terrible that it could frighten a god. I think this is going to be the last chapter we'll read today, but it's the start of chapter 12, which is so long that it's split into two pieces. So this will be probably where we end. Chapter 12, A Ghost in Red Sets Fire Upon the Military and Civil Temples. As he had suspected, on the young man's face was a serious burn scar. However, horror warning. Body horror warning. Just gonna take a second and just... If you don't want some body horror, maybe mute for a minute, and then I'll do a thumbs up when it's good. However, beneath the expanse of the blood-red scar, one could vaguely make out 3 or 4 very small human faces. The human faces were the size of an infant's palm, scattered crookedly around his cheeks and forehead. Because they had been burned before, each face was severely shriveled and looked as though they were screeching in pain. With these strange, screeching miniature human faces squeezed onto an originally normal human face, it truly was scarier than any ghost. In that instant, upon seeing that face, Xie Lian felt as though he was thrown into a nightmare. An immense fear numbed his entire being, to the extent he was unaware of when he stood up. He also wasn't aware of what kind of expression was on his face, but it must have been extremely frightening. The young man was slowly and hesitantly taking off his bandage, already feeling uneasy. Seeing his reaction, he took 2 steps back, seeming aware that Xie Lian couldn't accept a face like this. As if to protect himself, he suddenly covered the terrifying face, leapt up off the ground before screaming and fleeing towards the depths of the forest. He chased and shouted after him, "Wait, come back!" But because he had stood still for quite some time before finally reacting, and with how the teenager was more familiar with the roots of the mountain, it comes without saying that the teenager disappeared without a trace. No matter how much Xie Lian shouted, he would not come out. With no one around to help him search and lacking spiritual power, thus rendering him unable to use the spirit array, he dashed through the mountain and searched for an hour with no results. As the cold wind blew, Xie Lian became more clear-headed and knew that randomly fumbling around like a headless housefly wouldn't result in anything. He gathered himself together and thought, perhaps he will come for little Ying's corpse. He doubled back to Mingguang Temple, but was startled. He was greeted with a mass of people clothed in black, all gathered in the forest behind the temple. With solemn faces, they carefully took down the 40 or so corpses from their hanging positions above. At the front of the forest stood a tall figure with his arms crossed, currently supervising the group of people. The head turned, revealing an elegant yet cold face belonging to that of a young man, which turned out to be Fu Yao. It seemed he had made the trip back to heaven before bringing back a group of officials from Xuanzhen Palace to help. Xie Lian was just about to speak when the sound of footsteps came from behind. It was Nanfang, who had finished sending off the villagers and just returned. When he saw this scene, he cast a glance at Fu Yao and said, "Didn't you run off by yourself?" The way he said it was very unpleasant, causing Fu Yao to raise an eyebrow to show his displeasure. Xie Lian did not want them to begin arguing at such a critical moment and interjected, "I was the one who had him return to bring backup." Nanfang sneered. "Then where are our reinforcements? I thought at the very least you would get your family's general to personally come." Fu Yao answered with indifference. When I had returned, I heard little Pei had already made it down here. Thus, I did not spend my time looking for our general. Furthermore, even if I had tried to find him, with how busy he is, he would not necessarily have the time to come. Quite frankly, according to Xie Lian's understanding of Mu Qing, even if the general had had the time, he still wouldn't have come. But Xie Lian currently didn't have the time to think on the topic, and wearily said, "You guys shouldn't argue right now. Help me find the teenager first." Nan Fang furrowed his brows and asked, "Wasn't he just here with you?" Xie Lian answered, "I had him take off his bandages and scared him away." Fu Yao's lips quirked. "That's unlikely. Your cross-dressing has not reached the point of frightening." Xie Lian sighed. "Blame me for being so perturbed I didn't react in time. Little Ying had just died, so he was already provoked. Then he thought I was frightened by his face. Perhaps he was unable to bear this kind of blow, so he ran off." Fu Yao wrinkled his nose and asked, "Was he really that ugly to that extent?" Xie Lian answered, "It's not a question of whether he was ugly or not. He has the human face plague." Hearing those 3 words, Nan Fang and Fu Yao's movements and expression immediately stiffened. They finally understood just why Xie Lian would be so rattled. 800 years ago, Xianli Ancient Kingdom's imperial city had been swept by an epidemic. In the end, the entire kingdom was wiped out. That plague, when people fell ill... some body horror. That plague, when people fell ill, small swellings would appear on their body. They would grow increasingly larger and harder and begin to ache. Soon enough, they would start to notice the swelling would start to become uneven, 3 sunken places and a convex, looking like eyes, mouth, and a nose. After that, the features would become more clear until finally it would resemble something similar to a human face, and if left ignored, more faces would grow on their body. It was reportedly said the faces grew for so long they grew their own characteristics, could even open their mouths to speak or scream. And the name of this epidemic was the human face plague. Fu Yao's face went through several changes before he uncrossed his arms and said, "How is that possible? That was eradicated centuries ago. It's not possible for it to reappear." In response, Xie Lian only spoke one line, "I did not mistake what I saw." Nan Fang and Fu Yao found themselves unable to refute him. What Xie Lian said, no one could have refuted it. Xie Lian further added, his face had traces of being burned before. It might have been from trying to burn the faces off. For those who suffered from the human face plague, for many of them the first reaction would be to take a knife and slice the horrifying thing off or use fire to burn it to death. They wouldn't have hesitated to sever a limb or break their bones if it came down to it. Nan Fang spoke murmured? "Oh, translators, please, 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 adjust things to sound normal in English. He likely isn't an ordinary person. He might have lived on this earth for several centuries, but more importantly, is the plague on him contagious?" Despite this being a major headache, the problem was still something Xie Lian calmly contemplated over. He answered with certainty, no. The human face plague is very contagious. If the disease on the teenager was contagious, everyone on Mount Yujun would already have been infected by now. He should have been cured already. It's just that he can't get rid of the scars that were left behind. The 3 of them couldn't risk being careless. Fu Yao seemed to have a rather high position in his palace hall, and thus called the heavenly officials to scour every inch of Mount Yujun. In spite of that, they were still unable to track down the young man. He must have already escaped from the mountain and disappeared into the busy crowds. For the present, they could only return to the heavenly realm and seek Lingwen Palace for assistance on this matter before awaiting further news. The thing on the teenager's body wasn't contagious. At least this one fact was something to be rejoiced. But Xie Lian thought back to his terrifying appearance. If his appearance was to be discovered after leaving the mountain, he was afraid the teenager would be seen and called a monster, cursed, beaten, and even killed. It would be best to find him as soon as possible. Without wanting to delay any further on Mount Yujun, he picked up little Ying's corpse and set off descending the mountain. Because he was so absent-minded, only when the tea sommelier screamed at him did he notice he'd entered the small tea shop while holding the corpse. He repeatedly apologized and went to find someone to bury the body before returning. After he finally dealt with everything and sat down, Xie Lian silently sighed. One matter finally came to an end. He felt as though these past few days after his ascension had been more exhausting than collecting scraps for an entire year in the human realm. Climbing up and down, leaping over roofs and vaulting over walls, rolling, yelling, and doing costume changes and cross-dressing entertainment. All the bones in his body were like they were going to collapse and fall apart, yet there were still many unsolved riddles and loose ends to deal with. He really wanted to hang a sign on his back saying, "Ascension is not as good as collecting scraps and promoting it in the mortal world." Fu Yao flipped the front hem of his robe and sat beside Xie Lian's hand. Unable to hold it any longer, he rolled his eyes and asked, "Why are you still in those clothes?" Upon seeing his eye roll, Xie Lian was overcome with an inexplicable feeling of familiarity. Only then did he finally take off the bridal dress he'd been wearing this entire time. As he wiped off the rouge and face powder, he felt a bit forlorn. Then this would mean I was dressed like this the whole time I was talking to General Pei. Nanfang, if you'd only reminded me of this back then. Fu Yao said it might be because you clearly looked too happy wearing it. Nanfang ran around the entire day, but now he finally got the chance to sit down and rest. He said, "There's no need of a reminder. Little Pei wouldn't care what you wear. Even if you dress 10 times weirder than your current attire, he wouldn't utter a single word when he goes back." Xie Lian felt that tonight he really had borne this little heaven official too much toil, so he poured him a couple teas. After thinking back to little General Pei's icy cool expression and comparing it to Zhuangji's crazy one, he said, "This little General Pei is really calm and collected. Such great equanimity." Nanfang drank the cup of tea and objected. "You shouldn't judge him by his outwardly refined, courteous appearance. Like his predecessor, they are both hard to deal with." This much Xie Lian knew, and towards this matter, Fu Yao also was in agreement and said, "Pei Su is an upstart who ascended 200 years ago, but his power is awfully fierce, and he climbed the ranks very fast. When he was appointed by General Pei, he'd barely come of age. Do you know what he did then?" Xie Lian asked, "What?" Fu Yao coldly spat out one line. "He massacred everyone in a captured city." When Xie Lian heard this, he was pensive, but not surprised. In the heavenly court, emperors, kings, and generals were everywhere. The saying, "one military achievement result in 10,000 withered bones," was used to describe the matter of conquering and defending a kingdom. If you had the desire to be an immortal, you must first become an illustrious individual. And beneath our feet we walk a bloody path. Fu Yao summed it up. In the heavenly court, there are few that are easy to get along with, and no one can be trusted. Xie Lian listened to his tone, which sounded as if it was coming from an experienced person warning a youngling, and had the urge to laugh. He suspected perhaps Fu Yao had gone through a lot in the heavenly court, for he must have felt deeply on this topic for him to speak in such a way. But he also knew that despite ascending 3 times, the time he'd spent in heaven each ascension was short and fleeting, much like the lifespan of a night-blooming cactus, gone with a blink of an eye. If one were to discuss the subject of understanding these immortals around him, he was truly no match against these 2 little heavenly officials. Seeming to disagree with Fu Yao's words, Nanfang said, "Don't be an alarmist. There's good and bad everywhere, and there are still quite a few trustworthy heavenly officials in the court." Yet Fu Yao responded, "Trustworthy heavenly official? Are you referring to your family's general?" Nanfang answered, "Whether or not it's my family's general, I don't know, but it definitely isn't your family's general." Faced with this sort of situation, Xie Lian was long accustomed to it, and it was no longer out of the ordinary. In addition, there was still something on his mind, so he didn't have the energy to try and divert the conversation. With things wrapped up in the north, he returned to heaven. He first went to Lingwen Palace to tell her about the situation with the teenager, entrusting her to look for him in the human realm. Hearing this news, Lingwen's face fell serious and agreed to his request. She added, "Lingwen Palace Hall will do everything within our power to search. But who would have thought to expect that a visit to the north could have tied in so many things? We really troubled you, Your Highness." Xie Lian replied, "I must thank those 2 little heavenly officials for volunteering to go help, and Mingguang Palace's little General Pei. I really don't know how to thank them." Lingwen spoke. "Since the problem was caused by an ill-fated relationship with old Pei, naturally little Pei would have to deal with it. He's already used to cleaning up messes, so there's no need to thank him. If your highness is not doing anything else when you return, could I trouble you to check in with the spiritual communication array? Everyone still needs to gather and discuss the matter. Xie Lian also had many questions that went unanswered. After leaving Lingwen Palace, he aimlessly went round and around before he found himself on a small stone bridge. The stone bridge crossed over a running river. The river water was extremely clear, for you could make out the movement of clouds below. Past the running water and clouds, you could even make out the rolling mountains and large stretches of square-shaped towns from the world below. He thought to himself, this is a good place, and thus sat down on the bridgehead before he silently recited the password and joined the communication array. The moment he entered, he was met with such a rare instance of bustling excitement within the array. Numerous voices spoke over one another. Everything was in chaos. The first thing he heard was Fing Zhen's curses. Fuck! Have you guys chosen which mountain to suppress her under yet? That female ghost, Wanji, is a lunatic. No matter how much we question her, she only clamors over seeing General Pei while refusing to tell us about Green Ghost Qirong. Little General Pei said, General Zhuangji was always a stubborn and vehement person. Here, one sec. Got my peppermints out. Fing Zhen's voice became even more furious. Little General Pei, has your General Pei returned yet? Hurry up and let her see him and get the whereabouts of the green ghost out of her so we can be rid of her sooner. Fing Zhen was most unaccustomed to dealing with women. To have him deal with interrogating her, Xie Lian couldn't help but sympathize. Little General Pei replied, it's useless even if she sees him. She'll be even crazier after she sees him. Another voice piped in, the forest of hanging corpses again. Qirong's taste is always so low class, it's unpleasant. Even their ghost realm disdains him for having awful taste, so it's clear to all he is indeed very low class. All the heavenly officials interacted amicably. It was clear they were very familiar with one another. As a newcomer who had ascended 800 years ago, Xie Lian should have silently stayed where he was without speaking, but after listening for a while, he couldn't help but cut in. Excuse me, what was that about the forest of hanging corpses in Mount Yujun? Is Green Ghost Qirong in that area too? Because he did not often speak in the array, his voice was unfamiliar to everyone. As the heaven officials contemplated whether or not they should answer, the first one to answer him was unexpectedly Fang Jin. He answered, Green Ghost Qirong isn't at Mount Yujun, but what happened over at the Forest of Hanging Corpses was the female ghost Swan Ji's doing. It's what he requested and her offering to him. Xie Lian continued to ask, is Zhuangji Green Ghost's subordinate? Little General Pei answered, yes. General Zhuangji died several hundred years ago, even though she had some resentment. She was always powerless when it came to causing trouble. That only lasted until a couple hundred years ago. General Green Ghost Qirong found her to his taste and appreciated her. He took her in and made her one of his subordinates, causing her power to significantly increase. The meaning behind his words were basically, the female ghost Zhuangji causing trouble could not be blamed on General Pei, because originally she didn't have the ability. If they wanted to pin the blame on someone, they should pin it on the Green Ghost Qirong, for it was him who took in Zhuangji and gave her the ability to harm people. Originally, the heaven officials present had all thought this was a disaster caused by General Pei's karma. They just didn't voice their opinions out loud, but literal General Pei had still perceived it. With this neither gentle nor heavy way of reminding them all, they immediately hid their thoughts deeper in their hearts. Xie Lian asked some more, then has Mount Yujun been thoroughly investigated? There should be another child spirit. This time it was Mu Qing's voice that surfaced, sounding neither cold nor warm as he asked, child spirit? What child spirit? Xie Lian thought to himself, Fu Yao probably didn't tell him the details. Perhaps even him coming out to help was kept a secret, so he did not mention Fu Yao in case it might cause trouble. He answered, on the sedan chair, I heard the laughter of a child who spoke in nursery rhymes as a warning. At the time, there were 2 other small heaven officials present, yet neither sensed it, so the spiritual power of this child must be exceptional. Mu Qing said no spirit child was found in the search at Mount Yujun. Xie Lian found this to be very strange. It couldn't have been that the child came specifically to warn him. When he thought of that, he suddenly recalled something else and asked, Speaking of which, I also met a teenager who could command silver butterflies around Mount Yujun. Does anyone know who that was? The lively, bustling, chaotic spirit communication array suddenly fell silent the moment those words were out. This kind of reaction, Xie Lian had seen it coming, and so he waited patiently. After a while, Ling Wen finally asked, "Your Highness Crown Prince, what did you just say?" Mu Qing coldly answered for him. He just said he met Hua Cheng. Ah, so now we know the name of mysterious ghost with the silver butterflies, Hua Cheng, which I think I'm saying right, but I could be wrong. That is the romance interest, who we will learn more about next time, because I don't want to push my voice too much. Thank you all for joining me. In about an hour-ish, we will start Fatal Frame, which will be fun. We're going to start Fatal Frame 2 from the beginning. It's been a while since I played it, and I remember nothing. It's been like a year or more. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy what I do and you have the ability to do so, consider supporting the channel. There's a document in the description that shows all the benefits you can get from being a member. As little as 99 cents a month gets you a lot of extra content and bonuses. You can follow me on social media or join the Discord to hang out with folks. It's a great time. Tomorrow will be more Fatal Frame and also The Untamed, which is the TV show we're watching over on Discord. And then Lord of the Rings on Wednesday. This story will continue every Monday. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.